Hi, welcome back to Space Thoughts. What I'm going to do today is the first of a two-part video that's going to be dealing with salvage, in particular salvage as related to outer space. Um, I see a lot of talk in forums and articles about, we need to have a right to salvage in outer space. And a lot of this goes back to the idea of salvage in the maritime concept. And I really have a pet peeve with the term salvage in outer space, and I really don't think it's applicable given the uniqueness of outer space as compared to the maritime environment. In fact, I really don't think you can compare the two or, say that they're related because really they're not. So what I'm going to do with these two, with part one and part two, is I'm going to explain the idea of salvage in the maritime concept so people understand it. And then in part two, I'm going to go more into outer space law, why salvage doesn't apply, and actually give you some idea of some an idea I have for actually reclassifying or reterming the idea of salvage for outer space that makes it a little bit more, how can you say, acceptable or congruent with outer space law. Now, I've written two articles about this for the Space Review. Back in 2017, I wrote an article on salvage, and just about last month for the Space Review, I wrote an article that's basically based on this two-part video, and I'll put a link to both those articles in the description. Beforehand, I really want to emphasize this. I really don't like comparing outer space to the maritime domain in terms of legalities. I mean, the maritime domain is really is a good place to draw upon, but outer space is its own creature, and it really needs to be treated differently. It's got to become its own discipline, its own set of jurisprudence, and not really being comparing one, maritime to outer space. In fact, if you really want to get technical about it, outer space is more like Antarctica than it is the oceans. But still, we tend to draw analogies to maritime law. And as much as I loathe the idea of comparing maritime law to outer space, even I do it every once in a while. When I first started in space law, I was comparing it a lot. Been trying to get away from it, but I tend to be drawn back to it as well and making analogies. In fact, just made it the other day with a colleague when I was speaking to him. So what I'm going to do in this first video is I'm going to discuss the maritime concept of salvage, because I think that's really misunderstood, and the term is just used so flippantly that people don't really look at what salvage in the maritime concept really is. And after this video, in the next video, which hopefully I'll do next week, I will talk about the outer space, why salvage isn't really applicable, and some ideas of how we can, actually reterm this and create another type of activity that would be more, like as I mentioned before, congruent with outer space. So let's go to our slides here. Now, there are two concepts in maritime law that deal with salvage. It's called the law of fines, and then there's salvage. And salvage is broken down into two categories: contract salvage and pure salvage. But I wanted to focus on this one first, called the law of fines, because this is the one people in maritime law that people confuse with salvage. They call it salvage, but it's not. And again, this is actually taken from the article that I mentioned in the Space Review. I just cut this out of my document and used it for these slides. So this is, if you go to the Space Review article and read it, you will see the exact wording here. Basically, the law of fines allows a finder of abandoned property to acquire title by reducing the property to personal possession. Case in point, if there was a vessel on the open seas that was just floating there, a civilian vessel floating on the open seas, and there was no crew on board, no passengers are on board, and it was just drifting. If a tug or a salvage crew came along and basically hooked onto it, towed it back to port, they could go to court and say this vessel was abandoned under maritime law, and ask the court to grant the salvor actual property interest in the vessel itself. And from there, it could actually scrap it, or it could negotiate with either the insurance company that may have paid off a claim or the original owner to reclaim the vessel. So in other words, in the idea of the law of fines, you are basically laying claim to an abandoned vessel on the high seas, one that no people on board and no crew, and looks like it was just left derelict for anybody up for grabs. So, and the key point of this is it has to be abandoned. And I'm not going to get into the technicalities of what constitutes abandonment under maritime law that the courts use, but understand that abandonment basically says it's basically been written off. I mean, in the case of if the insurance company wrote off the vessel and paid a claim to the original owner, in a sense, it could be considered abandoned. That would be one factor in favor of abandonment. So in that case, the salvor or whoever could take possession of that vessel, get claim to it in a maritime court, and basically sell it for a profit, either back, like I said, back to the insurance company, or maybe even to the original owner, or for scrap. It would depend on as long as they got the rights to it, they could basically do with it as they please. So understand, that's the law of fines. I'm going to and basically this paragraph actually distinguishes between the law of fine and salvage. And here, the point of salvage in the context of maritime law is to encourage persons to render prompt, voluntary, and effective service to ships at peril or in distress by assuring them compensation and reward for their salvage efforts. In other words, salvage is basically an incentive to assist in the recovery of vessels, whether it's under the concept of pure salvage, what we'll talk about next, or under contract salvage. And in each case, the salvor involved is either will get compensated under different theories of law, or by the owner writing a check, or in fact, if the owner wanted to grant him the vessel himself, saying you can have it. But in this case, it's to understand under the law of salvage, under the idea of salvage, a vessel isn't considered abandoned. Talking about pure salvage now. This is the first form of salvage in its purest form. It's a voluntary service rendered to imperiled property on navigable waters where compensation is dependent on success without prior agreement or arrangement having been made regarding the salvor's compensation. In other words, if I find if another vessel is, if we're on the navigable waters and there's a vessel out there in distress and it hasn't been abandoned, and I hook onto it and I actually recover it and tow it back to port, the owner, in that case, and the owner could come and make a claim to it, but at the same time, the salvor can say, okay, under the laws of pure salvage, you owe me for recovering your vessel. Now, this is different than the law of fines, because in the law of fines, the vessel is abandoned. Now, let's have a hypothetical here. What if I bring it back and the owner says, not mine, I abandoned it, I don't want it, insurance already paid it off. In that case, the salvor could go to court and actually petition the court for possession of the vessel under the law of fines. However, let's say I bring it back to port, and the owner meets me on the dock and say, "Hey, I'm really glad you recovered my vessel." At that point, the salvor is entitled to compensation through what we call the theory of quantum merit, which simply means as much as deserved. Which basically says, I performed this service for you, even though we didn't have a written agreement. And bottom line is, because I performed this service for you, you should compensate me for performing it. And usually it's a percentage of what the value of the vessel is. And I think under maritime law, it's usually like 10% or so of the value of the vessel that the salvor is entitled to. Pure salvage, I mean, and again, that's a matter, okay, if you go back and the owner fights you about it, well, then you can take them to court and you can raise the issue of quantum merit. Pure salvage is probably one of those things that is, how can I say, it's one of those aspects of salvage where you are not guaranteed to get paid. For example, and the example was I bring it back to port and I meet the owner there and the owner refuses to pay. Well, what happens? I'm either stuck with a vessel, or I got to take them to court and I got to make them pay. I mean, sometimes the value of the vessel may not be as much as actually what the recovery of the vessel costs. So you may want to go and actually sue for quantum merit in court versus the law of fines. Why do I want this vessel when it already belongs to the owner? So, and again, I won't get into legal machinations of that, but understand, in the idea, under the idea of quantum merit, there's no physical bargain for agreement for salvaging the vessel. It's basically, I found it, I picked it up, and under the theory of quantum merit, you owe me compensation for, say, 10% of the vessel's value for returning the vessel. The other area of salvage is contract salvage. Now, basically, contract salvage is the salvor and the owner of the property, the vessel, or rig, or whatever, or other ocean-going vessel in navigable waters, basically negotiates with. They negotiate with each other, saying, "Look, the salvor can say, look, I will for X amount of dollars, I will go out and I will recover your vessel and bring it back to port so that you can use it again." Now, the idea is within the contract, basically, the salvor can say, look, if I don't recover it, I'm going to get paid anyways. But if I do recover it, you're going to pay me X amount. If I don't recover it, I'm going to get paid X amount. Now, naturally, if the salvor recovers the vessel, they're going to get paid more than if they didn't recover the vessel. Now, again, and what the terms of that would be bargained for between the salvor and the owner of the vessel, whether the owner of the vessel is the original owner or an insurance company that already paid off a claim for that. And there are reasons why for an insurance company might want a vessel salvage. For example, if the original owner decides to abandon the vessel and makes a claim on the insurance, there might be a reason the insurance company say, you know what, we got to get this thing out of the way anyways. For example, if it's in a river, rivers are navigable waters. So if a barge is sitting in the middle of the river and the owner has basically said, I'm going to wash my hands of it, or gets a claim on it, the insurance company would have liability for that barge clogging up the river. And obviously, I think the government would come and say, look, you got to move this thing. So the insurance company in that case might become the owner and come to the salvor and say, look, you got to get this out of the way. So, raise it and get it out of the way so that we don't have any liability. And that's where the bargain for legal detriment comes from. And that's what we call consideration. And again, the amount of compensation is basically determined through negotiations. In the industry, in this industry, there are traditional ways of doing this. There are set practices that are put into place. But the idea in contract salvage is something that's actually done with an actual agreement. Pure salvage is you stumble upon the prize, you take it under your custody, and you bring it back to the owner and insist on payment, maybe quote 10% of the value of the vessel or the property, and have them compensate you for that, else or bring them to court and sue under the idea of quantum merit. And I've seen quantum merit in not so much, quantum merit actually doesn't come up in just the maritime setting. That's a general contract term that basically comes into play in a lot of other areas of commercial law and things. For example, if I think the best example of quantum merit I can think of was from my contracts class way back in 2000 that basically says doctor performs an emergency service on a patient outside of the office, a life-saving procedure, and the doctor, even though there wasn't an agreement between the doctor and the patient for that procedure, for that life-saving procedure, because the doctor performed services, the doctor is entitled to the value of a service, or quantum merit. And those type of areas, if provable, are enforceable in court. So the idea law finds, boom, it's completely out of there for outer space. It just doesn't work, and I'll talk to you just a little bit about that in the next slide. Pure salvage, that's, again, the idea of pure salvage, again, because of the intricacies of outer space law and the differences between maritime law and outer space, doesn't quite really work for outer space as well. On the other hand, contract salvage does apply, and in fact, it has worked before in the context. I believe the space shuttle recovered 2 satellites back in the 90s, and actually under contract to the owners. The satellites failed to go into the proper orbit after launch, and the space shuttle mission went up and retrieved them both and brought them back to Earth, where they were refurbished and launched again to usable orbits. So this works into it, and in fact, they were in kind of a preview to the next part. Is fundamentally the idea of contract salvage has also been held just recently, and I talked about it earlier this year in a video about Space Logistics LLC's MEV-1 project, where they actually latched on to an Intelsat satellite and put it back into service. And in a sense, that could be considered something like contract salvage. But again, we want to get away. I want to get away from the salvage term, and I'm going to discuss that a little bit more detail in the next video and an alternative. But as a precursor to the next video, I'm going to go to a certain aspect of the outer space treaty that really kind of makes the whole idea of salvage a non-starter for me in terms of the maritime concept, and one of the reasons it really bugs me. Article 8 of the Outer Space Treaty. A state party to the treaty on whose registry an object launched into outer space is carried shall retain jurisdiction and control over such object and over any personnel thereof while in outer space or on a celestial body. Ownership of objects launched in outer space, including objects landed or constructed on a celestial body and all their component parts, is not affected by their presence in outer space or on a celestial body or by their return to Earth. Such objects or component parts found beyond the limits of the state parties to the treaty on whose registry they are carried shall be returned to the state party, which shall upon request furnish identifying data prior to their return. Okay, that's a mouthful, and of course I'll leave this up here for you to read, and of course you can go to the treaty and look at it itself. But fundamentally what this says is there is no such thing, because space objects, when they are launched into outer space, retain, basically they belong to what we call the launching states. For example, the Intelsat satellite I mentioned earlier basically was launched by the United States. It was a private company, but it was launched under the jurisdiction of the United States. So technically it is registered to the United States. So in a sense, an idea, somebody wants to say under pure saying, well, that satellite was probably abandoned and anybody can get it. That doesn't really happen, because under under outer space law, a state really doesn't abandon anything. The ownership belongs. The ownership of the space object actually continues into perpetuity. And this kind of again, I'm going to do what I don't like to do. I'm going to go back to maritime law. In maritime law, customary international law, the idea is federal warships, battleships, or any other federal warship, even military aircraft that are lost at sea. Those wrecks are still considered the property of the state that actually created them, even though they may have sat there for, in some cases, for hundreds of years. And actually, this has been through the courts before. So the idea is that the federal government really never has to really expressly abandon those. And again, that's something that's been litigated in the courts in order for somebody to go in and salvage it. Otherwise, they're off limits. In other words, if there's a wreck of a battleship at the bottom of the ocean, the salvor can't go in and actually start exploring the wreck and taking pieces off the wreck and actually going to court and trying to claim jurisdiction over them, because in the case, basically that what the whole idea is that the country who built that warship, that still belongs to that country, even though it may have sat there for decades or even centuries. So that whole idea of continued ownership kind of got emulated onto the Outer Space Treaty and is really codified here in Article 8. Space objects are retained in perpetuity by the state that launched them. Even though they're a private satellite, even though they may be a private satellite, they still are registered to the state that launched them. And the idea of abandonment really hasn't been developed in outer space law. So in essence, the idea of pure salvage is out the window, and maybe even the whole idea of law of fines is out the window, as is pure salvage, because you can't go and say, well, I recovered this from the bottom of the ocean. Technically, you violated international law and the rights of a state when you did that. The same thing with a space object. I'll go with the idea of Salvage 1. That Andy Griffith movie. In fact, that was kind of the premise of the first article that I'm going to list in the description here. Is they went to the moon and they gathered up a bunch of artifacts from the Apollo landings, and they brought them back to Earth and basically blackmailed the U.S. government into buying them back from them. Technically, they broke international law when they went up and gathered those artifacts from the moon, because they still belong to the United States, to the United States government. And essentially, the government never really expressly abandoned those objects down there. The jurisdiction remained in perpetuity. So Article 8 is what really makes, in our Outer Space Treaty, is what really destroys the idea of the law of fines and pure salvage applying to outer space objects. But like I said, the idea of contract salvage, which has been done before during the shuttle program and is being done right now with the with MEV 1 and soon to be MEV 2, which was launched just a few months ago, is probably actually opens up a whole new area for this. But again, like I said, I don't like the idea of salvage, and in the next video, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this and talk about a new idea that I have for actually creating an activity that could actually be legislated through domestic law. So until then, I'm going to basically leave it at that, and we will talk to you next time.